Yuta versus Kenjaku, the most anticipated clash in the culling game thus far, and back in the start of the Sendai colony, Yuta declared that he will kill Kenjaku himself. But let me give you the honest truth. There is a lot of people with mixed opinions, and as a Kenjaku enthusiast as myself, I do want Kenjaku to win. However, this will be an objective video assessing both sides' strengths, advantages, and why this clash might not go the way you think it will. First, let's start off with Yuta, because at this current rate, Yuta is either underrated or overrated depending on who you talk to. Why is he underrated? First, Yuta has not gone all out since Volume 0. Because of this, we don't even know his full arsenal of abilities. And even still, a lot of people like to use the 5 minutes weakness, myself included, when I'm obviously trying to praise other characters, but to the extent that they believe that because of his 5 minutes weakness, he won't be able to defeat other top tiers. This, in my opinion, is very disingenuous, and if well, for the show that we've currently seen, we don't know the countdown that will take for him to reactivate Rika again, as well as the plethora of abilities that he can end up getting. One thing that is great with an ability like his is that Gege can pretty much give him whatever copy techniques, and he can say that he interacted with that person. With what we've got with the current use of his abilities, it is potentially unconditional, meaning that he could potentially get things such as Boogie Woogie, maybe when he was in Africa got new abilities there, and Gege can really surprise us when we get to this potentially anticipated clash with showcasing to us a lot of new abilities that we currently haven't seen. Another key thing is when we saw him bring back Rika in Sendai, we saw the vast majority of curse tools that he's got. This means to us that he, like I just talked about in regards to the abilities, can have so many different things that can end up aiding him in the clash where now he has to actually kill the other person. One thing that people also underrate about Yuta is they talk about his mindset, when we can get a nice contradiction towards the end of Sendai where he says if it wasn't for the points, he potentially would have killed these sorcerers. We can also infer that he had killed sorcerers already with the fact that he had accumulated points before the beginning of Sendai colony, meaning he will do it if he has to, but just takes no pleasure in fights. Now there is an extent of what Uro's comments were, and he does not necessarily have the level of disregard of somebody such as Gojo and Sukuna, and this could either be foreshadowing of his potential awakening or the potential Achilles heel of what will cause him to never reach his full potential. Regardless, there's a nice addition of a potential domain expansion which could really change up the scope of the series and can be something that pushes Yuta to a whole new level in regard to his anticipated clash with Kenjaku. One thing that people do is severely underrate base Yuta. He has elite level curse energy and currently the biggest crop of curse energy that we've seen in the series. He also has the ability of reverse curse technique that he can use, and one of the most underrated aspects, he can still use the partial manifestation of Rika. The thing is, like I've mentioned before, Yuta holds back a lot in a lot of his fights, therefore we still haven't seen anywhere close to his real full strength, especially against a top tier such as Kenjaku or Sukuna. Moreover, his physical stats have become underrated because he was still keeping up with Yuji in a physical monster such as he is, and even though yes, Yuji was holding back based on the POV from Yuta, it still indicates to us that he's not as physically weak as people make it up to seem, and him with his reinforcement allows him to become an elite level sorcerer. What could be overrated about Yuta? One thing that a lot of people like to say as well, they can use curse speech. And listen, there is a lot of things that can be used to prevent curse speech. I don't believe the hype of the way people talk about curse speech is warranted from how it's being used in the series. One, a sorcerer who is aware of his abilities can not only use curse energy to protect their ears, but just saying curse speech will not necessarily kill somebody straight away. We saw what it did to somebody such as Geto, who ended up bouncing back and ending up fighting still. And I know that version of Geto and Yuta is not the same, but it gives us at least an indication to how it could be used against a sorcerer. And then to boost the curse speech argument, Kenjaku has Geto's memories, meaning he is aware of him already having curse speech. So the likelihood that Kenjaku is going to get caught and then frozen by curse speech and then they'll kill him one time, like, come on, let's be serious. That is not going to happen. And the likelihood of even him getting caught off guard by curse speech, especially if we go back to the information from Kamo saying you can plug your ears with curse energy to protect it, it means that it's going to be pretty redundant unless he catches them completely off guard in tandem with his plethora of abilities. So the people who say curse speech solos, my guy, no it does not. There's also the way in which people have already made pre-assumptions on his domain being more refined than others based on no limited information. I understand Yuta is a prodigy, however we can't make assumptions on his domain expansion until we see what it actually does, and I think it's going to be a huge game changer overall. There is also the one thing which we got from Kenjaku, who said, Yuta, right? I don't see what is the hype with him, he can't become the next Gojo. A lot of people take this as he's now completely downplayed Yuta, rather than taking away the context of the fact that it was him in becoming the next Gojo Satoru. To become the next Gojo Satoru, that's an overwhelming amount of strength that could only be in comparison to somebody such as Sukuna. But regardless of this, just because he can't be the next Gojo does not mean he is weak. And I think this is something that a lot of people try to do to downplay Yuta, when there is a lot of things that could indicate that Yuta has currently not really had any L's or been pushed to such an extent currently in the series. One thing that can also become a little overrated is his fight in Volume 0, where we take away one of the key aspects, and that is the fact that they said if Geto had used his full arsenal, Yuta potentially would have lost. That means when people just say he can spam curse speech to stop would be kind of contradictory, and I think that comes down nicely to what I will touch upon when I get to the Kenjaku section. Overall, I think Yuta is extremely strong, and I think a lot of people who believe this would be a mid-low diff fight are being very disingenuous to somebody who has currently potentially been the strongest current special grade not named Kenjaku currently available. Meaning that he's the person who will most likely give him the best option in a fight, and even if you use something such as the quote about Maki talking about we can't defeat Kenjaku in conventional means because somebody such as Yuki lost, one, Maki is not a good power scaler in this sense, because this is all in her assumption from what I'm assuming is the level of special grade. She doesn't know Yuta's full strength, neither does she know Yuki's full strength. So all of her guesses are just made of assumptions, and we can see throughout the series how assumptions can also end up being incorrect. 2, from what we know, that special grades like to fight alone, and especially Yuta has somebody such as Rika making his whole arsenal a little bit more different than the average age sorcerer. So the potential of what can really happen in the conflict is pretty much unexpected, and even though I am personally on the side of Kenjaku will win, I don't think people should be surprised if Yuta pushes him or if he ends up coming out with a win in the end. But now let's talk about my guy, top tier finesser, the #1 Jujutsu criminal, and that is Mr. Kenjaku. So first I'll talk about what could be overrated and then what is underrated about Kenjaku. One thing that could be overrated about Kenjaku is nothing. No, I'm trolling. It's his whole main POV of what he said with Yuta. Him saying that he doesn't know what is the hype about Yuta, he can't become the next Gojo Satoru, could be seen as him downplaying Yuta to an extent. Even though he has the memories of Geto, that version of Yuta is nowhere near comparable to the current version. Yes, that one might have a stronger Rika with it being a vengeful spirit that cannot be exercised, as well as potentially just being stronger in general. Of course, this is an assumption, don't say it's true, this is just what I believe. And even though that Yuta has unconditional and no time limit in beginning to use his ability of mimicry, Yuta has not only got a domain expansion, has got his reinforcement improved, his whole combat has improved, he still has the potential for so many more techniques that can really change the outcome of the fight. And if that does happen where Yuta starts getting a bunch of new techniques, I'm gonna need you guys who were saying it's plot convenient for Kenjaku to have anti-gravity to say it's plot convenient for Yuta as well. Because all I want is consistency. But regardless, I think that is something that he ends up underrating them for that extent. Is his use of curse break manipulation and people assuming that Yuta can just run up to the curses and output reverse curse technique. Currently we haven't seen them being used as beams, meaning that he has to be close to them. And what people like to forget is that Kenjaku won't just stand still while he uses his curses. Now, people are going to go and say curse speech, and yes, he could potentially use curse speech to destroy the curse. But you also don't take into account that the main use of the curses is the abilities that they have. Let's take an example of things such as the Shibuya incident. He was using things that could create like a black hole, which ended up causing people to drop between the barriers in what we saw with Yuji. He used things such as Ganesha, which could remove objects. It was only coming against somebody such as Yuki who could negate concepts, ending up not using his whole arsenal. So the curse itself isn't the danger, it's more so the ability assigned with it. In tandem with him fighting alongside the curse's abilities, gives him a far more utility that I don't believe the argument of, well, he has curse speech, he can just destroy them, is more than valid. More so than that, he is the second best barrier user. And even though there are other things in regard to refinement and domain expansion, the fact that he has an open domain makes me think more likely his domain would be most likely more refined than Yuta's until we see what Yuta is cooking with his domain expansion. Moreover, his barriers being comparable to somebody such as Tengen just puts him on a whole new level. That even if Yuta uses a domain expansion, things such as his simple domain means he could potentially overwhelm his domain just for the simple fact that he's a stronger barrier user. In tandem with his whole arsenal and his whole plethora of knowledge, it puts him in a very good spot that, in my personal opinion, in a 1v1 I do edge Kenjaku to win. But why I do think, and I said this is the honest truth, no one is getting washed. And in my personal opinion, Yuta is going to cook Kenjaku to an extreme, even more than somebody such as Yuki. Why do I say that is, well, he has a bigger emphasis with this currently being his goal. Meaning if he is to lose and potentially lose his life, there can't be without some huge significance or consequence to Kenjaku that he ends up coming unscathed. More so than that, it could potentially be done in a team-up manner, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but currently a lot of our big bosses, when they end up fighting, end up getting jumped. We saw Yuki use a special grade who end up getting jumped, and currently if you're not really Gojo and Sukuna, when we come against other special grade criteria, a lot of people end up doing them in teams. So people such as maybe a Yuta Maki team up could be interesting, or maybe even a Yuta and Yuji team up with Yuji having a lot of narrative sense to obviously face Kenjaku. By my personal opinion, I don't think Gege is going to make Yuta in essence beat the same person twice in the same body, even though that Geto and Kenjaku are the same. And I think it's going to be an interesting matchup because I think could potentially Yuta go against his biggest weakness, which is the disregard to others to become a person far stronger than what he is. I think personally we could see a Yuta awakening and could really change the scope of the series, or will we continue down the path of, well, Yuta's goal really resides in protecting his friends, meaning it won't be in a situation where he disregards them because that is his main purpose in his current life. Regardless, there's so much things that could come from this outcome. And I think if you give me my honest opinion, I do edge Kenjaku, but I'm also a Kenjaku fan, so there is some bias to that as well. Regardless, I do believe a lot of people are sleeping on Yuta to an extent of saying he's going to get washed, because I don't think any special grade, especially of that caliber, is going to get washed, even though I do believe Kenjaku is stronger. I think Kenjaku is most definitely going to cook, and if this clash does end up happening, because it's something that has seemed to be foreshadowed, I think Gege will do it justice and make sure that both combatants really show their full arsenal. But what do you think? Yuta or Kenjaku? Who do you think will win? Do you agree with my potential analysis? And let me know down below your thoughts and opinions.